Hey guys, we've got another Phantom chat here, and I'm honored to be sitting across virtually from Neeraj Beery. He's got a massive history of building companies, understanding what avenues to take, what twists and turns to do as he's a founder himself. This is the one thing I do appreciate about partners at VCs, or a requirement for me is for them to have to build something. So I'm amazing and excited to have Neeraj here. Quick intro on why we do the Phantom Chats. We started this chat and podcast specifically around the innovators in the industry, right? The people, the movers and the shakers, the ones who are understanding what the future beholds when it comes to the food industry. And that involves not only the operators, but it involves the thought leaders who are looking to kind of build those companies for the future. Before I bore everybody and I lose everybody, I'm going to kick it off to Neeraj. Why don't you give us a quick introduction of yourself and take your time with it, because you have an amazing background in history.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Nabil. It's great to be here. Appreciate the invitation. As you mentioned, at my core, I am also an entrepreneur and a founder, and I have worn a lot of hats. Today, I'm running a venture fund, but I'll take you back to the beginning. I would say most of my life has been built on building businesses, and I've done that since I was in high school. I ran a newspaper, started a debate business, a debate instruction business in high school, and then after college, did a couple of years of investment banking, and then kind of discovered the tech industry and got super enamored and spent the next many years building technology companies. The first one, I like to call this like my personal business school, is I started a subscription commerce business in LA. That was geared towards men. This was kind of like the beginning of like the era of like Birchbox and companies like that, where every month you'd get something in the mail. And a lot of these companies were targeted towards women, and we wanted to create a business that would give men something that they would love every month. And our twist on it is we found 6 celebrities who co-founded the company for us. That was everyone from athletes like Michael Strahan, Blake Griffin, Tim Lincecum, to musicians like Nas, and actors like Nick Cannon. And
Wow.
What we found is that we were like, we can't figure out what to put in the box that we send every month, and why not get those boxes curated by actual influencers that people looked up to? And so these collection of celebrities would curate the items that go in the box every month. We would mail it out, and you'd receive a box of and it would have Nas's favorite headphones, or like Blake Griffin's favorite sneakers, that kind of thing. And it on the back end, it was more of a marketplace. We were going to brands and telling them, hey, we can get you a micro endorsement for discounted product, free product, things like that. And within, I want to say 3 to 4 weeks of launch, we were doing $1 million in run rate revenue.
Wow.
Which was really spectacular. And that was basically with $0 in marketing spend. We were just kind of riding the wave that kind of influencers were able to create for us. That was a lot of fun as a kind of a first business, as like a 24-year-old living in LA. It was like making every mistake in the book. It was a really cool business. And offline, you had mentioned you wanted to hear that kind of first story of how we started. And the business actually got started because we cold emailed Mark Cuban. Found his email online, sent you a blank email, a cold email, said this is an idea of a business. And within a few weeks, he wired money and kind of like our first initial institutional capital and kind of got us started. And that really taught me a few things. One is it taught me about entrepreneurship. It taught me about hustle. It taught me about the power of cold emails. And it really kickstarted this idea that if you have an idea, you can just go fucking do it. You don't need to ask for permission.
And I think what's not bad, sorry, Neeraj, is you're 24, rubbing elbows with Blake Griffin, getting money wired from Mark Cuban, and I think the Clippers were actually good during those years, so that's another positive aspect too. So you were in the area that was really good. But from all those founders who are listening onto this podcast, you said you co-founded it with a bunch of celebrities. So when it came to equity allocation, how difficult or how interesting were those conversations? Especially because this is one of your first startups, right? So it's like, how much do I actually give a celebrity? And how quickly do you have to take your starstruck away to really analyze, evaluate? How do you build that process?
This was an interesting time. It was kind of like at the beginning of influencer marketing as a real part of, a real weapon for D2C companies and things like that. So there was no market rate for this stuff. So we were the same way we were discovering all of this, the partners that we had were discovering it too. And so it was a lot of trial by error. It was a lot of fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
But what we found is that once we got one person on board, it kind of created a market rate, and the rest were dominoes that fell. We pitched a ton of people. We pitched world class A level kind of celebs who were way out of our price range, and you find the right people who are going to provide the right value and see the right value out of it, and you kind of get your bearings that way. So it was not the simplest thing, but if you have enough conversations, you water finds its level, and you figure that out.
That's amazing.
But we talked to other people who were like, hey, we would do it if we get 80% or 90% of the company, and at that point it's a little bit off the table. But we learned a lot about how to bootstrap businesses and how to grow them without marketing spend, and it was super fun. At the same time, I always had an interest in food, and it was the industry that I mostly always wanted to work in. And so in 2013, I decided to start a food business, and the idea was pretty simple. It was like, how do we solve the pain point of what to figure out what to eat for dinner every night? And I found for myself, as someone who had a really demanding career, and I constantly had to pick between eating something that was healthy or eating something that was easy. And I just kept picking the thing that was easy. And then I looked at all of my peers and my friends and folks that I knew who were in similar situations, and most people were picking convenience over quality and really sacrificing many times a day. And I figured there had to be a better way to solve this. At the same time, this was 2013. This was right around the rise of Uber as a business, and this idea of use your phone, press a button, poof, magic happens, problem solved. That concept was just getting started, and it seemed like the perfect kind of combination of what if you could create that same type of experience, but instead of a car showing up, what if you could solve your food problem? And that served as a foundation for my second company, which was called Sprig, which we created to be the easiest way for people to eat well. And the idea was every day we would create a brand new menu of items that we were cooking that day. They'd be sourced sustainably from local farms. We tell you full nutritional information. We tell you the farms that they came from. It would be affordable, and you would tap on your phone, and 10 to 15 minutes later, that meal would show up hot, ready to eat. And so we wanted to over deliver on price, convenience, and quality. And we found that in the existing world, a good option would give you one of those three. A great option would give you two of them, but nothing would give you all three. And so we thought if we give you all three, people would use it and create a habitual behavior out of it. And for the first couple of years, that's exactly what happened. We kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of value proposition, and the market just exploded for us. And within 18 to 24 months, we had delivered 1 million meals. We had raised about 60 million in funding, and the business had really taken off. And we had kind of helped usher in this most recent wave of food delivery and food tech. This was around the same time that DoorDash started and Postmates started. Uber was still a black car service, so they weren't even doing UberX yet. Lyft was just getting started, things like that. It was this whole new world was just starting. And ran that company for about 4.5 years. The first couple of years, we had a really massive, fast rise. And then for a number of reasons, the business started to lose product market fit. And at the end of 2017, we had a couple double-digit millions left in capital and a couple of years of runway. But I was looking at the business and I didn't think it would work anymore, so decided to shut the business down, return the capital, and then I moved to Europe, where started to get involved in a lot of companies, and one thing led to another, and I raised a venture fund in Europe where I now invest in early stage food tech companies. And happy to dig into any of that, because I know you're super interested in food.
I'm very interested in that, but the one thing I want to note on Sprig, and I was a user, right? I actually was.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
I was the same situation where I grew up in a family where every work was the right mentality. So fast food was the easiest option, right? And so as I was kind of growing up, I kind of educated myself around food. And I'll tell you this, using Sprig, I used it all the time. I had it delivered to a WeWork probably daily for lunch. And it was fantastic around that. But I'll tell you this, around the business, you guys were ahead of the time, right? It's like 10 to 15 minute delivery window. The amount of food tech companies out there that are doing that right now is quite interesting. You're conscious in the sense of sustainability, which is extremely important for a lot of businesses today. I almost think it's a requirement for what we need to do. And then even just locally sourcing and providing transparency on the ingredients that you guys are providing and producing your meals is even better. And all doing that, and this is like where the real kicker is, just because I'm looking at a lot of this as we look at the industry, you're doing that on a maintainable wage for the folks who are actually driving, cooking, supporting, right? And this is what we're seeing. Like you saw all the problems of that industry, and you're like, let's do it. And so all I want to say is, regardless of what the end results were, which I still think were successful, because you had the ability to evaluate and say, okay, this is not going to flip. Let's shutter the business, or let's close down the business and return some value to shareholders. But what's really beautiful about this is I almost think there are so many Sprigs today, right? And then when I say components of Sprigs and the learnings of Sprig, which led to that foundational piece, right? Because I read it too, and I think it's amazing. So just a comment, not even a question. I was just saying kudos.
No, I appreciate that. And two, I think that there is a pretty interesting learning there, which is like, we actually got a lot of parts of the thesis right. And so like in terms of predicting where the world is going, we were able to be a little bit ahead of the curve on understanding where consumer behavior was going, what types of problems like the food industry was going to have, and what types of problems were going to solve it. So we were right about like a lot of legs of the thesis actually. But what we were wrong about ended up being maybe the most important, which is that we were right about a lot of our predictions, but we picked the wrong business strategy. And fundamentally, we thought at the time that we had to vertically integrate and solve all of these problems at the same time so that we could create the perfect solution. And what's funny is that actually, like you mentioned, there's a lot of different Sprigs. I can deconstruct the business and break it out into something like 9 different businesses that we're building at the same time. And today, I can find an individual company solving one of those 9 or each of those 9 that are all billion-dollar businesses. And so actually, like, we didn't need to be right about, we could have been right about all 9, but actually the mistake we made was just, we made the business too complicated by solving all the problems at once, when actually focus probably would have led to a better probability of success.
Mm-hmm. And that's amazing to hear, because, and I'm going to ask you a loaded question. You don't have to answer it. If there was, let's say you reverse and you know what you know now, and you understand you have 9 businesses within Sprig, what would be the one you would pick if you would focus?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, I've had the chance to somewhat answer that, because now I'm an investor and I get to go back and now pick the ones that I'm most interested in. I think I think a lot of them are pretty interesting. I think, for example, the idea of building a food business that serves like better for you, more convenient food that doesn't have the same requirements from a logistics or technology perspective. I think like that's exciting. I don't think that's probably the one I would build. I would most likely build the technology layer that powers this next generation of food companies. And I've gotten a chance to invest in a couple of companies that do different parts of what we were doing and create an entirely, B2B business around it. There's also like, I wouldn't, this is not the one I would build, but even something as simple as like we were building delivery only kitchens. So we actually created like the first kind of like ghost kitchen, like on-demand ghost kitchen. And like, that's obviously a 10 to maybe $1 billion opportunity, maybe even bigger, kind of longer term. But if you look at the players doing that, they probably add up to 20 billion in market cap today. Like, so I think like there's a lot of different parts of the business. There's like supply chain technology. There's infrastructure for recipe development. So I don't know. It'd be hard for me to answer one. If I had an answer, I'd probably go back and build it right now. But I think the reality is I'm just interested in the space and helping push the entire industry forward.
Yeah, you're basically saying, hey, I don't want to choose right now. I'll just invest in kind of all 9 of those pillars, which is good and a great tee up for Tech Ventures, right? So it looks like you took enthusiasm, you built a successful company and extremely hard to even scale it to the point that you've done. And then you took all those learnings and you go, okay, how can I enable the next wave of founders? And so here we are with Tech Ventures. And I think what I'm interested in is, number one, the name. Number two, why and what your investment thesis is. And number 3, what are some really cool companies that are coming out because of Tech Ventures?
Yeah, totally. So I guess I'll preface this by saying like I did not have this like grandmaster plan after Sprig of like, oh, I want to become a VC. It was probably like more honestly, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I felt super burnt out. And my wife and I were like, hey, why don't we move to Europe for a few months and just kind of regroup and then figure out what I'm going to do. And so we had the like luxury and the luck of just moving to Berlin. I didn't work for like 6 months or actually no, probably like 12 to 15 months, something like that.
Nice.
But what I did do is I started to meet really awesome entrepreneurs that were building different types of businesses. And even though I was like super burnt out, I found that like I could share some of my learnings and just like talk to people. And for me, it was energizing. And for them, it was super helpful. And so I started to like, I did it once, I did it twice. And I started to like build this like cadre of founders who like would just hit me up and would text me, we'd hop on a call, they'd fly, I'd go meet them in different parts of Europe. And I just started like to advise, some formally, some informally, a bunch of startups. A lot of them were within food. And I really enjoyed it. And I loved the ability to work directly with founders, help them solve problems, not be like a board member, not someone who they have to report to, but kind of be a peer that's been through this and can help them navigate their challenges and like just be someone that they can call. And I loved it. And I was like, damn, I wonder if I could like if I could do this with more of my life. I wonder if I could like make this scalable and sustainable. And then it kind of hit me. I was like, oh, it'd be better than just giving advice, as if I was giving advice and I was giving money. And I was able to like help them in multiple ways and give them kind of more runway and help them utilize their runway better. And so that's when it became pretty clear to me that like starting a fund would be the right next move. At the same time, I also was meeting a lot of folks within, I was living in Berlin at the time, and I was meeting a lot of really awesome people in Berlin. And one of the people I met was a family that started one of the oldest sweet snacks businesses in Germany. They like invented the German word for cookie, and they brought cookies to Germany for the first time 150 years ago.
Wow.
And they were pretty interested in food innovation and were kind of like more living in like old world versions of food, but didn't have as much experience in food tech or in Silicon Valley or anything like that. And so we decided to partner and create Tech Ventures. Tet is actually a hieroglyphic, Egyptian hieroglyphic. It means everlasting. And our idea was like, hey, what if we create a fund that was centered on sustainability, on like building long-term sustainable businesses that could help transform the food world into one that is more everlasting and one that it will sustain over time. And so there was like this, I don't know, there was like some alchemy there, and we were excited about it. And so we decided we were going to build a global early stage food tech fund that is designed to work with companies that are rebuilding the global food system. And so that's, and the global food system has a few parts to it. One is it's obviously geographically broad. We invest everywhere around the world. Most of our investments are in the US and spread out around Europe, but we've also invested in a few emerging markets. And when we say food system, that is also, very broad. At Sprig, I would say we were building 9 companies. At Tech Ventures, my focus is even broader within the food world. Everything from how food is grown, to how consumers interact with it, to supply chains, to what I was doing at Sprig, how it was delivered, to biotech companies that are changing what is possible from a food production standpoint, to synthetic biology companies, and kind of everything in between. Within that, I would say it's hard to pick just a few, but I'll give you a couple of exciting ones. One is a business that was called Koa, QOA. They just actually rebranded, but they are developing a technology to create chocolate that doesn't require cocoa beans. Cacao, not cacao. Cacao has a lot of really big issues with its supply chain. One is most of it's done in a specific region in Africa that uses a lot of like child labor. It's super unsustainable. It's also like probably going to be victim of pretty massive climate change challenges. And I think there's very real possibility where in the future we just don't have chocolate source unless we're able to find new supply chains for it. So they're using synthetic biology to recreate chocolate at a molecular level without requiring cacao. And you can make a cacao-less chocolate.
What's interesting about that is we had the head of confections from Dandelion on here. And as we move into this future, they are so conscious around where cacao comes from, right? And exactly to that point, which is quite interesting because I didn't even fathom to think about the sustainable practices around harvesting cacao at all, or even the regions where it came from. And what's really important too is that kind of these businesses not only are predicting what's happening, but when it hits the consumer, I almost think it's too late. Once the consumer understands that cacao is, sourced incorrectly, I think we're going to be dealing with a bigger problem. So I think good pickup on that one, which is really, really interesting.
I think it's super interesting. And especially if supply chains are hit, what happens next? Prices go up or it's not available. And then that's when shit gets real, for consumers. Another company, and actually the first investment we made out of the fund is a company in New York called Kingdom Supercultures. Super interesting. So what they are doing is they are kind of like deconstructing and using machine learning to improve food fermentation. And so if you look at a lot of the biggest food categories in the world, a lot of them are the result of fermented food. So everything from cheese to beer, to chocolate, to wine, to yogurt, to a lot of dairy products, bread. These are all foods that are kind of fermented as part of how they're being produced. And the way humans have discovered how to ferment these things is just by chance. Like people have like mixed a few things together, created a culture, and then put a base product in it, and just like stumbled upon these new food categories that are often the biggest in the world. What this company is doing is they've created a database of all of the possible molecules that create a culture, and they are able to, using their proprietary technology, able to predict what would happen if you combine different enzymes, different things like that. What will the culture you create do to a base product, and they can kind of reverse engineer and create foods with very custom properties, and create the perfect culture for it. So you can create a natural food that has, again, custom properties, and they've been able to do things like create a shelf-safe kombucha that doesn't have added sugar. They can create plant-based milks that have very specific types of mouthfeel, a shoyu that is used at Michelin restaurant with a fraction of the sodium, and you can kind of take an end product, reverse engineer it, and kind of go back to more natural foods that use real biology, but just do it in a more intelligent way.
And I think there's even a rise on alcoholic beverages, right? So it's when you look at kind of the hard alcohols, I think there's a move towards fermentation. And what's interesting from an endpoint perspective, right? So it's important to understand how these were created, but from what I'm seeing, talking to chefs and restaurant owners and bar owners and private club owners, they're looking for ways to onboard as much fermented drinks as possible, because there's little avenues around liquor licenses, right? So you just need a beer and wine license versus a full liquor license, which is really interesting. So from a full stack perspective, I think people are ready for that in the future.
That's super interesting.
Yeah. What are some kind of, that business is quite interesting because they're focusing on multiple, they're an enabler, right? From a technology perspective. Is there a production aspect to a lot of this that needs to be created from a new technology standpoint so that you can have more fermented products out in the market?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. So, most companies have to early on, especially really technical companies, you have to kind of pick early on, are you building a platform or are you building a product company? And these two examples I gave you are actually, Koa is building a product company. They're making consumer-facing chocolate. Kingdom Supercultures, the second one, is a platform business, and so they actually are creating partnerships with really large FMCG businesses to help them create these products. So, I think there's a difference in terms of business model. In terms of what are the things that are bottlenecking these types of industries? So in synthetic biology, the major bottleneck is in fermentation tanks and things like that. There's synthetic biology has been mostly used for pharmaceuticals. It's been used for fragrances and things like that. But there is a huge issue in bioreactor space and repurposing old bioreactors and using them for food. And even if you're able to do that, there's still probably not enough capacity. So investing in developing more bioreactors, which can be a multi-million-dollar kind of project to build, and takes a lot of time. So there are huge bottlenecks in terms of unlocking supply capacity, which will in turn help make a lot of these things, bring them more at cost parity with kind of existing products that they're trying to supplant. But I would say the bigger bottleneck, more than any of that, and as a believer in capitalism, the biggest bottleneck is consumer demand is just not there yet. I think a lot of my investment thesis is around the idea that this is starting to bubble up, it's starting to percolate, but we're still at the beginning of consumer education, and which eventually will turn into consumer demand for these types of products. And once that happens, I think a lot of these things, a lot of dominoes start to fall, and a lot of the supply issues start to get handled.
Yeah. So there's always needs to be a consumer demand where, hey, I want this, now let's push it forward. And that kind of is great, right? Because when you said from a production standpoint, it's going to take a few million, right? Maybe even more to kind of build up these production facilities so that you can meet price parity to what you're trying to actually disrupt, right? Mm-hmm. And that's very apparent in the meat industry and plant-based meat industry, right? Where they're trying to meet price parity of what's happening. How are companies actually navigating this process, especially in the current conditions? Because the need for capital doesn't stop, right? Especially if you're in a lot of these plant-based companies that are building future-changing products that actually taste delicious, right? And creating that consumer demand as that TAM grows. But we're now sitting in this market where everyone's kind of looking at each other, saying, are you going to make a move? Am I going to make a move? Maybe I'm going to wait. So, seeing as you're looking at a lot of businesses and you're looking at where you think the future is going, What are your recommendations for a founder? What are your recommendations for an investor? It'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think the founders are going to find themselves in an increasingly tricky situation as the funding markets are turning. And so this is like a very real-time conversation. I can't, I don't have a crystal ball. I'll give you just my hypothesis here, which is that I would say a lot of companies in the space are at the point right now where they have been able to fundraise based on the idea of like designing kind of like a bioproduction process or their thesis around what their whatever unique IP or technology can do to create a new type of food or to create a new type of product. The challenge is, how do you cross the chasm and go from like your pre-product market fit ideation design phase into scalable manufacturing? And as you mentioned, that requires a lot of capital. And the problem is the capital sources are drying up. So I think the unfortunate reality is I think maybe not most, but a lot of these companies are just not going to be able to cross the chasm. And what we're going to see is that there has been like pretty mass fragmentation along alternative proteins, plant-based meats, things like that. And most of these companies are not going to be able to bridge the gap and get to the other side before the funding markets start to come back. And so I think we're going to see a lot of companies actually, unfortunately, shut down. And you're going to see a lot of really incredible minds and incredible entrepreneurs and great talent then probably flock to the few that are able to cross this chasm and make those stronger. And so I think right now we're in a period of pretty large scale fragmentation. And I think we're going to enter a period of consolidation as the funding markets dry up. So I think actually for a lot of these founders and a lot of people working at companies, I think like being pretty like intellectually honest with what the outlook of the company is, and then pivoting accordingly if that is the right move, and moving in a position of strength, because I think like the industry actually could benefit from more consolidation and getting better minds together, and maybe we could even move faster as an industry and solve really hardcore problems faster if there is a bit more consolidation. So I think it's, no matter what, it's a tricky line to cross, and I the one thing I do feel very confident about is that the problems that we are solving, they need to get solved. So even if the funding environment starts to get more shaky, this is still an incredibly important industry, and these problems are super important. And so that is going to create the market opportunity and keep the funding markets open to some extent, at least. So I think this is going to be even more important to continue to make progress in these industries. And I think this could be pretty transformative for a lot of these businesses and the industry at large.
I love it. And then as an investor, right, besides doubling down on all your investments at Tech Ventures, what should be their outlook today? If you would give any of these new micro VCs that are emerging in the market, what kind of thesis would you give them on how they should evaluate founders, how they should evaluate businesses, especially on the pre-seed and seed stage?
I think that when the markets are super frothy, it lets you get a little bit lazy and sloppy at the margins, and you can get caught up in FOMO and things like that. When the markets turn, it forces honesty, intellectual honesty, and clarity. And so actually and kind of going back to fundamentals. So I would just say find the best entrepreneurs who are working on the most important problems and back them and double down and keep tripling down. And this could be an opportunity where you get to buy equity at very favorable terms. And like if you kind of like go back to fundamentals, like the market opportunity still exists, like the end prize is still there. So I think actually the terms are even better than they used to be.
Amazing. Well, we heard it here, right? hyper focus on the people that are making impact in the world, and the world will kind of get back to you. And it's still time to invest, so keep throwing your money, which is good. But Neeraj, we're kind of running out of time here, and I want to say thank you so much, and I appreciate the time that you've carved out of your schedule to tell us your story, and also where you think the future is going. But I think for anybody who's listening, I want them to reach out to you if you're okay with it. I want them to go to Tech Ventures. I want them to look at all your companies that you're helping and supporting, and kind of creating that ecosystem for. So where should we go? How do we get in contact? Let's make that happen.
Yeah, totally. Find me on any platform of your choosing. I'm at Neeraj Beery on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. Shoot me an email. It's find me on Instagram, whatever. I'm available wherever, and always down to chat.